response to events as Brexit and Trump's election, electoral shocks, right? Many relevant scholars and influential people around the world have been suggesting that some decisions perhaps are too important to be left for people to decide on. On the other hand, we are seeing a rise of judiciary activism as well, that is, decisions made by unelected magistrates that affect the lives of many people. Robert Dahl affirms in Democracy and Its Critics that the main opponent to democracy is the idea of guardianship, that experts should decide for the people in a form of vanguard party, as Lenin once proposed, actually. English thinker G.K. Chesterton once said that the democratic faith consists in letting people decide the most important matters. Is it not then a contradiction, this appeal to experts in democracies?
I think there is a tension and ultimately a certain contradiction in the entire conceptual architecture of liberal democracy. Because keep in mind, liberal democracy is a compromise or an integration of three big principles. The principle of majority rule or popular sovereignty, let the people decide. The principle of minority rights, constitutionalism, and the affirmation of civil liberties, that there are things in a liberal democracy that the people are not allowed to do, that a temporary majority cannot take away the rights of the minority or of vulnerable populations, even including the rights of non-citizens, of immigrants, and that there has to be a certain floor of human dignity and human rights that is protected from the temporary and potentially intemperate will of the majority. And the third dimension has to do with the rule of law, horizontal accountability, and, if you will, delegation of certain levels of decision-making to experts, either in the judicial system, so that you get judges deciding the administration of justice and not popular emotions. So you get central bankers trying to preserve macroeconomic and fiscal stability and not politicians or temporary majorities who may just want to inflate the economy for temporary advantage. We've seen how that can pave a path to financial ruin for a country. And so that you have a competent state. Now, there's no way to maximize all of these values because they're in conflict. That's the contradiction. If you seek to have a state that is too insulated from popular accountability and technocratically competent and expert, then you risk going down the road that Dahl articulated, or perhaps foresaw, to the tyranny of a meritocratic elite in defiance of popular will and popular anxieties. I think there has been too much of that in the European Union, and the flow of power and authority, not only from the people, but from elected national governments to the technocratic superstructure of the European Union and its bureaucracy in Brussels. And a lot of the anti-European sentiment has been a reaction against this level of delegation of popular decision-making authority and responsibility to some extent, unelected technocrats. And it's very pervasive, and it involves all sorts of rules in economy and social life that many people in Europe, many Democrats in Europe, even many advocates of good government in Europe believe have gone too far. So certainly that needs to be looked at and borne in mind. At the same time, we certainly have a major reaction in the United States, and I think in other democracies, against what sometimes seem to be judicial activism, judges deciding social policy in defiance of popular will. But I would raise these caveats against those who criticize judicial activism by asking these questions. When a politician, maybe a popular politician, is being investigated for corruption or misuse of power, do we want his popular base of support to decide his or her guilt or innocence? Should this be a matter of trial, guilty or innocent, by the way, by public opinion polls? I think we either have a rule of law or we don't. And the rule of law and the administration of justice should not be subject to a democratic vote. They should be, I mean, you can have a democratic trial by jury in some systems. We have in the United States. But you can't have a popular vote deciding what the outcome of a judicial trial should be, particularly for a criminal offense. And this is why I believe strongly that no judge in any democracy should ever have to stand for election. I think this is a perversion of the rule of law, and it's a big flaw in the American system of democracy. This doesn't mean that federal judges who do not have to stand ever for election, they have lifetime appointments, or our constitutional court judges on the Supreme Court should be legislating reality. But it does mean that they should be insulated from temporary popular pressures. And I think one of the lessons we're learning, I repeat, is that the understanding of classically and in contemporaneous form democracy and its strengths, its promise, its flaws, its need for reform, and of the basic values and ideas and different models of democracy, this must be renewed for each generation and updated for each generation. And we need to invest much more in that than we have been.
That's great. We appreciate that. And just to sum things up, a final question before this whole scenario of uncertainties in the world. Let's just briefly comment on the future of a democratic political culture, just to pick on what you just said. In a recent book of yours, Developing Democracy, you mentioned some cultural correlates to democracy, such as moderation, compromise, cooperation, belief in democratic regime. Do you believe that these are still the values that should guide us, and what other essential values and beliefs should we add to this list, perhaps?
Well, you start with the most obvious. Democracy requires citizens to believe that it is worth defending. So that is irreducible. It also requires an active and vigilant citizenry, not just, of course, in electoral politics, but in civil society. Apathy or resignation or blind submission to authority, I think we've learned bitterly over and over, are the enemies of both democracy and good governance, and inevitably lead to a deterioration in the quality of governance. So citizens need to participate actively in politics. They need to come out to vote. They need to inform themselves in a thoughtful way and in a critical way, not in a blindly accepting way, not only in terms of what politicians are saying, but in terms of what media practitioners are saying, and what social media commentators are saying, and what news feeds are saying on the internet, and what their friends are saying. And so this requires that we develop anew, for the internet age, a capacity to think critically, to reason carefully, to question independently what we're seeing and reading on the internet, and to formulate a synthetic approach to information that doesn't just live in the bubble of someone's social media world and reinforce the echo chamber of friendly, reinforcing common opinions, but extends outside that to listen to different points of view. It's not a natural thing to do. As human beings, we all have tribalistic impulses. We want to trust and interact with people we like, people we feel almost a family relationship with, people we feel comfortable with. We need to constantly be pressed to get outside our comfort zones, hear different points of view, search for different forms of information, and have a little bit of diversity in our realms of interaction. And we need to think about how social media can provide cues and how citizens, when they are young, can develop habits of the heart and habits of information usage that do some of this. This is a very creative challenge for schools, for social media platforms, for moral and ethical leaders in society. That leads to the balancing nature of a democratic political culture. It's not only about vigilance, it's not only about participation, it's not only about the autonomous assertion of interests. It's also about listening, about reasoning, about mutual respect, about an understanding that democracy involves give and take, tolerance and compromise. And we are going to be in real difficulty, particularly in the internet age, where social media has developed such a rough, rude, polarizing, and venomous tone. We are going to be in real trouble if we don't cultivate and affirm for the rising generations that are entering this dangerous space the need for certain rules and ethics of mutual respect, civility, compromise, and a certain open-mindedness, willingness to listen to the other and consider alternative points of view. That is as much of the essence of liberal democracy and sustainable democracy as is the individual impulse to participate, give voice, and assert his or her interests and values.
That will be it. Thank you very much, Professor, for being here. Until next time, yeah?
Okay,
All right,
thank you.
Thank you.